yeah, I would definitely pray to Sai Baba. I mean, to me, he was God incarnated on the earth. And so I would pray to him like I would pray if he wasn't there.
Howard Levin, one of the original Sai Baba hippies, or rowdies. In 1970, Sai Baba took an immediate liking to Howard.
Swami I was just his favorite for that period for a few months. You know, I could do no wrong. And he just kept me close and gave me a lot of grace.
And Howard? Well, he took an immediate liking to Baba, a relationship off to a promising start.
He walked by me and he said, "Oh, new man."
I recall reading where that was your nickname for a while. Where's New Man?
Dog Man.
Oh, Dog Man.
I had a dog. I had a Lhasa Apso from Nepal.
The dog was a follower of Sai Baba?
Yes, she sure was.
As with countless devotees, Sai Baba would have a major influence in Howard's life. Howard did many work projects for Baba, and Baba gave Howard his love, and often, after work projects, his time.
And he would spend about 2, sometimes 3 hours in there with us, telling us stories, telling us about his childhood, giving us teaching, materializing things, teasing some of the ladies, you know.
But Howard's relationship, as I said, off to a promising start with Sai Baba, after many years wasn't given a chance to end that way, for a reason.
I am the only person who's ever been blacklisted from India for serving the Lord incarnate.
Howard in India had 2 different views over this problem, as you'll see, but no matter. Howard remains grateful for Sai Baba entering into his life.
Well, right now I feel like, you know, being 74 years old, I don't have that much time left in this world. And the last thing that Sai Baba ever said to me, he was holding both my hands and he said, "Now, no more worldly thoughts and desires. You only think of Swamiji." And of course, when he told me that back in 1986, and I was only 40, I wasn't quite ready. But now I'm quite ready to, you know, give up all worldly thoughts and desires and just focus on my self-inquiry.
Welcome to Souljourns and to part 1 of this 2-part series on Howard Levin. More on part 2 later. This interview was recorded on November 11th, 2020 via Zoom from San Francisco and Coronado, California.
Howard Levin, welcome to Souljourns. It's really a pleasure to have you with us today. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
You first saw Sai Baba, I know, I think it was June 1970. It wasn't your first year in India. You arrived in 1969. You saw him, your first time in your life, you laid your eyes on Sai Baba. The next day was the second day in your life that you saw Baba. And he extended to you a very curious invitation. You were with 19 other Westerners, and he said, "You come and stay in my house with me." I mean, when I read that, I was almost incredulous. Why would he do that? What did you do to merit that? And how did that work out?
Well, you know, we all showed up in Whitefield because it was spring, and Swami would leave Puja party in after Shivaratri and go to Whitefield because the climate was a bit cooler outside Bangalore. And so we were there, and we were basically sleeping in classrooms. He had a very small college. It was just basically 1 row of buildings. This was 1970, and the day I got there, actually, he left. He drove away, and I saw his hand, you know, waving out the window, and that was it. And then it was a week or 10 days before he came back. So he came to the classrooms. You know, he came out of his Brindavan bungalow. It was before the lotus-shaped bungalow. It was a different style bungalow, and he asked us, you know, we all lined up, you know, somebody said, "Swami's coming, Swami's coming." So we all lined up, you know, ladies on one side and men on the other, like an aisle for Swami. And he said, "Tomorrow college will begin. Where will you all stay?" And we said, "We don't know, Swami, you know, whatever you say, Swami." He said, "Then come and stay in Swami's house," you know. So basically we slept on our the men slept, the boys or the young men slept in our sleeping bags on the roof outside Swami's bedroom, which was on the 2nd floor. And there was a staircase that an outdoor staircase that came down to a back terrace. And the young women slept with Swami's sister and mother in the back of the house. There were women's quarters downstairs.
So this is 1970. Did he have much of an international following? Were you Westerners, the only Westerners
We
there?
were the only ones there, plus people like Indra Devi and Jack Hislop and Dick Bach, and people like that had already come, and seen him since maybe 68, 69.
So
But
here's
at a particular moment, June 1970, they weren't there. We were the only ones there.
so this is all brand new to you. This is the day after you met him, or you saw him for the first time.
Yeah, actually, he walked by me and he said, "Oh, new man."
I recall reading where that was your nickname for a while. Where's New Man?
Dog man.
Oh, Dog Man.
I had a dog. I had a Lhasa Apso from Nepal.
The dog was a follower of Sai Baba?
Yes, she sure was.
Any first observations or conclusions, or I assume you might not have been a follower. How could you have been one day in with Sai Baba? Were you curious? Was your mind running over things a mile a minute because this was so unusual for you?
Well, you're talking 50 years ago. And I had read the Bhagavad Gita when I had been before that in 1969. I actually came to India in 1968. And in 1969, I was up in Almora, and this famous Ayurvedic doctor that I was going to see, Dr. Bindu Joshi, gave me a Bhagavad Gita. And in the Bhagavad Gita, there was this chapter where Krishna says, in every age I incarnate, from age to age. And that kind of stuck in my mind, and I don't know why, but so this whole idea of avatar became like an obsession.
Howard, you mentioned Almora there, and I remember, I think, reading in one of your books that you talked about one night, I think, being awakened by the vision of a diminutive sized man with a funny hairdo, but you had no frame of reference at that time.
Well, no, I did, because I had been reading the Bhagavad Gita, and I had sort of was getting into Krishna and studying about Krishna, and so the vision I had was like a little Krishna.
It wasn't a little Baba.
Well, it could have been a little Baba. It was 1969. It was on a rainy night, and I had gotten stung by a scorpion in my finger, and I didn't know what was going to happen, and I fell asleep, and I got woken up by a little voice that said, "Hey," like that. And when I opened my eyes, it was like a little figure with a dome of hair. And it was prior to meeting Sai Baba, and I maybe heard of him, but I didn't even know, I didn't make the connection at that point.
You mentioned right before we started recording your age. You're a year younger than me. The reason why I bring it up, at 74, you have a memory that's as sharp as a razor, because you spoke, I thought, from a well-prepared text when you gave your talk just earlier this year, from events from 30 years ago, and you remembered him in vivid detail.
Yeah.
I say that now because my questions are coming from the two books that my wife Jody and I read when we were there in Puttaparthi. I guess we first went there she went there in 1997 or 98, and I went a year later. But Good Chances and Heart to Heart they're just wonderful books. We both reread them as we prepared for this, and they're just as useful today to any aspirant as they were back then. Have you written any other books? Are you planning on writing a book?
I wrote a kind of a novel, kind of based on a journey to India, and it's kind of a novel that actually Swami signed it, but I never did put it out for publishing. He signed the cover with love, the manuscript.
Were you happy with the book?
I have it somewhere. I have the manuscript somewhere. Yeah.
I would think you'd have a lot of built-in followers who would like to probably at least have a crack at it, because it sounds like it could be interesting.
I have no idea really how far and wide Good Chances has gone. I have no I have no idea.
Well, there's two people here in Coronado, California, who had these books with us since decades ago.
It certainly afforded me. I mean, I've been invited all over the world to speak, about Swami, so that was rewarding.
So the second part of my question is possibly, before your memory starts to lose its sharp edge, a memoir of some kind after the fact, how 30 years of distilling the message, the presence, and the lessons of Sai Baba might continue to veer or grow or diminish.
Possible.
Yeah. Okay, let me be the first to plant the idea in your head then. I think you'd
Okay.
have a lot of people who would want to follow with that. On Christmas Day, 1971, you wrote about seeing Sai Baba, and you had a chance to see him on a very auspicious day, because this is the day in Puttaparthi, I am assuming this took place, where he said, "Yes, I will see you. I will see you later in the day." I think an hour. It took him several hours to come back.
It was actually Madras or
It was
Chennai.
Madras. Oh, really?
Madras.
Okay.
Yeah.
Chennai.
Christmas Day 71 was, yeah.
Okay. So he said he was going away to the hospital, then he would be back, and he went to the hospital, and Walter Cowan was deathly ill there. In fact, he died. Sai Baba resurrected him to life. No small deal. Underscore several times.
Yeah.
You write about it almost as if he were going to give a talk in some place with no further commentary or details.
Well, that's all he said, you know?
Yeah.
He just came up to me and he said, "I'm going to the hospital to see Walter Cohen. I'll be back in 1 hour." And he had a big grin on his face, but he always seemed pretty happy anyway. And that was it. That's all he said. So we didn't even know Walter Cohen had been in the hospital.
I guess what I was expecting is perhaps a shade of your own personal views on such a happening. I would guess for the rank and file Sai Baba devotee, or people who aren't even Sai Baba devotees, to hear credibly of a story like this, their jaw would drop and just stay there for many, many days contemplating what they heard that happened.
Yeah. But, you know, the miraculous was such a daily part of Swami, you know. I mean, he would materialize something or reveal that he knew something or appear in your dream in a very timely manner, and to many people, myself including, visions, you know. So it was just sort of part of the general milieu of the whole thing, you know. Swami resurrected somebody. Oh, you'd meet somebody, you know. I met a man from Chennai in Whitefield, and he was asking us what our experiences were with Sai Baba, and you know, I said this and this. He materialized this for me, and he said, "Well, I died, and Swami brought me back to life."
That tops all of them. I believe all these insights that you relate bring a clear vision of the fuller nature of Baba to each and every one of us. That's why I love first-person accounts. Yeah. In 72, you told Sai Baba that you were an artist and had painted before, and he had a job for you, painting signs of all things, putting your artistry to work. And to your surprise, you say in, I think it was his first book you wrote, that he would stop by where he assigned you to go start painting signs on a daily basis and chat with you. Did you have a chance to interact? Was he willing to sit there, stand there, and listen to your questions?
Definitely. Oh, definitely, yeah. It's actually 1970.
Okay.
And it was in the summer. He had sent us to Puttaparthi after we had stayed in his house.
Mm-hmm.
And he said he had a project for the gents. You know, he used to call us ladies and gents.
Yeah.
And to paint signs with Swami's slogans on them. And they were stone slabs. So there was a lady shed, which was sort of where the giant pillar is today.
Right.
You know? It was a lady shed, and the ladies were there. So in the afternoon, he would tell them all, he would clear them all out, and it would just be us. And he would give us the signs. And he would spend about 2, sometimes 3 hours in there with us, telling us stories, telling us about his childhood, giving us teaching, materializing things, teasing some of the ladies, you know, that were like Shirdi Ma, who was an old devotee who had been with Shirdi Sai Baba and was still there in the ashram, had come to Satya Sai, and she was pretty old, and he would tease her. So he spent a lot of time with us, and everybody was so jealous, all the people in the ashram.
So how did Baba, how did the other people handle that probably growing jealousy, since he seemed to dote on the Westerners so much?
Well, you know, basically, it wasn't like so bad that people weren't mean to us or anything. People were actually really nice to us for the most part. You know, we gave them more trouble they deserved, quite frankly.
one thing I'm curious about, because you had so much, I mean, you hit the road running with your relationship with Baba, or so it appears to me. And I know for many of us, myself included, he would use a phrase, aptly so, in referring to us as doubting Thomases. Not my wife Jody. From the get-go, she was there full bore. I guess my mind works in different ways, and I took the slow, scenic route to get beyond the doubting Thomas part. Were you there in that way in your own head? Did you have questions that had been resolved almost instantly from the get-go, or were you still a doubting Thomas for a while?
Oh, I definitely have doubts. I probably still have doubts today. I think I have more faith than I have doubts, but I definitely had doubts. And I wrote about this in Good Chances, but in that episode where he writes the letter, saying, and puts our names on it, saying that we're all, good and deserving cases to get our visas extended because we were there doing spiritual practice with Swami and all that. And then he didn't give the three of us, there were three of us, he didn't give the Bangalore authorities wanted individual letters and not a group letter.
Mm-hmm.
And there were three of us he didn't give letters to, and the other two felt that meant they were supposed to leave. And I had doubts, but then when I went to Chennai to get my passport renewed, and that's when he made the garland dance to the bhajans and everything in that house. And so that was a miraculous experience, which gave me an enormous amount of faith to see.
Yeah. I'm glad I asked that. You write about how Baba knew your thoughts. That's not an unusual occurrence. There are thousands of devotees who say the same thing and are able to back that up. You gave some good examples in your books. Did you ever intentionally try to use that as a two-way street and communicate with him directly with your thoughts, expecting an answer back from him?
Well, I mean, if you consider praying, praying is basically using thoughts to communicate with God. Yeah, I would definitely pray to Sai Baba. I mean, to me, he was God incarnated on the earth, and so I would pray to him like I would pray if he wasn't there.
Did your Jewish background?
Pardon?
Did your Jewish background add to your ability to relate to him through prayer? I mean, there are people who came to Baba with no background.
My family were atheist Jews.
Okay.
They were only Jews for the culture, but they definitely didn't believe in God. And for some reason, I did ever since I was a kid.
And when you started to write letters home to mom and dad about what was going on in your life, it was a little bit different from the streets of New York. Did they just take it with a grain of salt? Well, Howard's going through a growth experience, or did they feel negatively about it?
Well, my father had that attitude, but my mother was very, very, she thought I was just brainwashed into a cult, and I was giving all my money to Sai Baba. Not that I had any money to give him, but anyway, she was, but not to the point where they would disown me or anything like that.
And that sounds like a period that a lot of people have to just grow through, not worry about their parents or loved ones or children might think of them. Because how do you explain the inexplicable to somebody from your own experience? Yeah. It's pretty hard. Imagine you did have people though who were fence straddlers when you returned home to, whether it was California or I guess it was New York back then, who might have asked you, Howard, what's going on in your life? Tell me more about this. I'm interested.
But when I came back to New York, I immediately went to Hilda Charlton, and Swami said, go meditate with Hilda. So everybody around Hilda had either been to see Sai Baba or Neem Karoli Baba up north. And so there was immediately a like-minded satsang. And the only contact I had with non-devotees was when I went to work and the people I worked with.
And you probably just didn't say a lot there. Yeah.
Well, I wasn't going to go to my office and say, hey, I was with a little guru in India who could materialize things from the air. I mean,
Did you ever do anything with the process of self-inquiry? I know many people have been on the path.
That's my practice.
That's your practice. I wanted to ask about that because Baba had been an advocate of the teachings of Ramana Maharshi from Tiruvannamalai, and I wanted to know if you had ever been there to walk around Arunachala. Did you come home with an intent You know, Baba's highest lesson, as I've always seen it, is to raise yourself to the level of knowing who you truly are. And for a lot of us, that is through self-inquiry or form of it. So you've been doing that.
Yes.
And where are you today with that?
Well, you know, as long as you have individual consciousness, you're not there, right?
No, but you and I probably both know people who are in the process of awakening. Has that happened to you at all?
You know, Ramana Maharshi would say that the self is always awake.
Mm-hmm.
And that there's no process. There's just the removal of the idea that the self is the body.
Yes. So that it's like having blinders on. Yeah.
Pardon?
It's sort of like having blinders on to the nature of who you truly are. And until those blinders get lifted, you don't know who you are.
Right. So the idea is that if you concentrate on the self, the sense of self, eventually it will expand into the universe. So I'm still here, right, as an individual.
Did you ever practice the Who I Am practice that Baba recommended to you? I think you might be the only source of something in print that talks about Baba's strong feelings about not just Ramana Maharshi, but his practice that he's taught until his death, I think, in 1950 of self-inquiry.
Right.
So you wrote that for a reason when you wrote it. You must have been in that process already when you sat down to write that second book.
Well, good chances just streamed out of me on the Darshan line. It just came through me. I wrote it down. I gave it to Elsie Cohn to read, and it was published as is. It was never edited. It just, Swami's grace, it just flowed through me on the Darshan line in 1978.
And she's the one who wrote the foreword to that book, I believe.
Yeah, Elsie did, yes.
Yeah.
So it just was one of those things. You know, the second book, Heart to Heart, took a lot more thought, you know, and more planning, but Good Chances was just kind of just flowed. It was just an amazing experience.
Well, if I were a publisher and had the power, I'd like to say, Howard, starting tomorrow, sit down at that laptop and start pounding away for your memoir on this.
It would have to be handwritten, I think.
Okay, some things change and some don't. That's interesting, and it's so much fun to be given a window back into the past. And in that window, I'm thinking, of course, there weren't nearly the number of followers of Sai Baba present, regardless of where he was then, as later years.
When Swami went open the floodgates, and we followed him up to New Delhi because we basically followed him wherever he went. In fact, the gals, you know, Michelle and India and Vijay, the gopis, they had a taxi packed and ready all the time, just in case Swami left. They would just jump in and leave. They wouldn't even have to go back to their accommodation, just follow him wherever he went. So naturally, we took the train and we followed him up to New Delhi, and that opened the floodgates because the crowds up there were so enormous. It was beyond anything we expected. I mean, we're talking 50,000, 100,000 people just everywhere he went, you know. And after that, people just started to stream in from North India. And it just exponentially grew. And in 1972 is when they started tearing down the old ashram and building up the new accommodations, the 2-3-story buildings, and making the mandir, you know, more fancy. It was very plain. It didn't have any ornamentation. So that all began around 1972 after Swami's trip to New Delhi, which was in around March, because I was actually flying back. I was in New York and flying back, and Swami came in my dream and he said, I'm in New Delhi, you know, because I was going to be flying to Mumbai. And in those days, you can go to Air India and change your ticket for free.
Right.
In the 70s. So I flew to Delhi and Swami was there at Sohan Lal's house.
I just caught for the first time when I read that passage in one of your books that they started to tear down the old ashram buildings. I never knew that happened. They must have been relatively new when they tore them down still.
No, there was just one story row of little concrete buildings, you know, that were built in the 50s when the ashram was built. And then there was some big sheds where pilgrims could stay in, and there were basically no bathrooms, and there were a couple of wells with pumps where the water would come on a couple of times a day. and electricity would be on maybe in the evening for a couple of hours, but it was very remote and very, very, there was no luxury, no comfort at all.
And I'm going to guess, I don't know with any degree of certainty, that the village of Puttaparthi was obviously just that when you finally arrived after
Just a
meeting.
collection of huts. Yeah, it was just huts and dirt roads, and it had nothing. Basically, to see what Swami did from where he came with absolutely nothing to when he took samadhi, it's amazing.
Yeah. In Baba's first summer course, I believe it was in Whitefield, Baba invited you and a friend by the name of Jonathan as the only Westerners to attend that first summer course.
No, only Westerners of the gents.
Oh,
ladies
okay. All right. Well, let's restrict the question then to the only Westerners of the gents.
Yeah.
Why the two of you? Why were you more special than the other Western gents?
I think, Jonathan and I had just met there, he was from London, and I think both of us were really deep, meditators and thinkers and studying scriptures and reading as many books as we can. But I was just, that was a period, when I came back from New York, and I had been there from Christmas of 71 and January, February into March of 72 to see my parents in New York. And when I came back, Swami I was just his favorite for that period for a few months. I could do no wrong, and he just kept me close and gave me a lot of grace. And no, I wasn't the only one, no, but certainly there were others. But as far as the Westerners go, and then when he invited the ladies to the summer course and not the gents, and I said, Swami, what about me? And he said, oh, yes, you and that other man, Jonathan.
I'm glad you mentioned that word. It's your own assumption that you must have been one of his favorites. Over the course of years, I've met several people and done lots of interviews with Al Drucker, as an example. Don't know if you ever knew Al Drucker.
Oh, very well. I know Al very well.
I think I met him in his mellow years when he was turning 80. He was nothing but pure love and nothing but pure teaching until he died. We were both living in Florida. See, I've been retired for 11 years, so this is 6 years ago. And he couldn't have been nicer, and he couldn't have been more forthcoming. His stories, like yours, were just a delight to hear, and a real signpost, each one of them, as to who this Sai Baba was and what he was about. Jack Hawley was another one. And I remember the period of being considered, maybe only by the individual, as being, for whatever reason, a favorite Baba, would seem to have a beginning and a middle and an end. And I always thought the end was the starting period of even more growth for a person to try to figure out the ways of Sai Baba. You see any truth there at all? So,
oh, I was asked to leave India 6 times.
Well, again, Al Drucker was too.
From 1968 to 1986, I received a total of 6 quit India notices.
Does that mean you were a bad boy or what?
Somehow I managed to stay there for years and years and years.
I think I remember you writing that it was the government that blacklisted you in 1986. Having to do with your work that Baba invited you to join about the planetarium.
Yeah.
You never explained that very much. Why would they have blacklisted you for that?
What I was told, and I don't really know because I have no way to verify this, that because I worked there on a tourist visa.
Okay,
I had broken
see.
the rule.
They related it to your work, yeah.
So I am the only person who's ever been blacklisted from India for serving the Lord incarnate.
Whoa. That's a distinctive record to hold.
Yeah. You hear that, India?
They'll be inviting you back tomorrow.
I hope so.
It looks like you've had some ups and downs. I think everybody who goes to visit Sai Baba goes through a period of ups and downs, visa extension issues, etc., and being thrown out of India, and 6 times, I guess. In hindsight,
no, I didn't. I got 6 quit India notices.
Oh, you didn't go, huh?
No, I appealed. Some of them I had to leave, and some I appealed.
Thanks for clarifying that. In hindsight, do you see all the ups and downs, especially the downs, as being instructive in your life? I mean, since you're in the path of self-inquiry, my guess is you would see all of that as being constructive for the goal of awakening yourself to the truth of who you are. Or am I being too philosophical?
Well, no, I understand what you're saying, Ted, but here's the way I look at it. The individual self is constructed or comes into being by the positive and negative charge. God or the infinite brings together the positive and negative, and that sparks individuality. And so as long as there's individuality, you're subject to the pairs of opposites: joy and sorrow, pleasure, pain, day and night, heat and cold, loss and gain, all of those things. And there's no escaping it as long as you have individual consciousness. So like Swami said in many interviews, happiness is union with God. So once you transcend or expand the individual consciousness into the infinite, then the suffering is over. Mm-hmm. But until then, you're going to suffer, basically.
Are you aware of many people in your circle of acquaintances or devotees from the past who are there? I mean, I'm taking the focus off yourself now. Are you aware of anybody who you credibly believe made that transition and yet they're still in the body, but they're pretty much aware of the truth of themselves?
It's hard to objectively verify that. None of the, I'm still in touch with the same group of people from 1970. In fact, we just had a reunion 2 years ago up in Montana. Mm-hmm. And I haven't seen some of them since the 70s, but nobody seems to be claiming, yes, I'm fully enlightened and,
I don't think that's something anybody would claim if that were true regarding them.
So, but I mean, I certainly felt so connected, even though I hadn't seen some of the people since the 70s. I felt that same connection that we always had.
That must have given everybody a great feeling to be reunited as Baba devotees after so many years.
It was going to be the 50th anniversary, but fortunately we did it a year early because of this pandemic. We would have had to cancel it if it had been last summer.
Yeah. And when you wait that long to do something, who knows who's going to be present
right.
A year hence. Baba gave you a little red book at one time. I vaguely recall reading that he was coming down the stairs inside his home, his house. And according to you, basically it said, don't ever try to understand me. I'm not somebody you can understand. Over the years, did you ever feel like as if you were on the cusp of understanding his purpose and his presence?
Oh, his purpose?
His presence.
I think his purpose was very clear. I mean, to understand how Sai Baba worked, how was he able to do what he was? I don't know if you can understand that, but his purpose was to show humanity that the important things are healthcare, education, housing, utility. He fostered, of course, religion and worship of God and science and art and music and literature and culture and all these good things. So his purpose was to create all that and to foster all that, I think, for humanity.
So what do you think he meant when he said to you, don't ever try to understand me?
Well, you can't intellectually understand God. Nobody can know what God is. We can feel God's presence, we can believe in God, but we can't intellectually know, because God is turiya in Sanskrit, it's beyond the mind. Or anything you think of, they say it's not this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, neti.
Right, exactly.
And so you get to the end of the list and there's nothing more to contemplate, then you get kind of close to understanding who you are.
Well, I think that's what he meant, that his divine consciousness was beyond the mind, so don't even try.
Yeah. Your love for Baba is well established. Glad to hear you talking about this way today. Glad to see it in Gene Massey's video with you several months ago. Though many years have passed, if this is too personal of a question, just say so. Where are you today? I remember asking Houston Smith when I was invited once to introduce this author of the world famous book, The Religions of Man. I said, I'm going to challenge you to tear up your 45-minute presentation and speak from the the razor's edge of where you are today in your own spiritual walk. He met me halfway with that challenge. I thought he was going to punch me in the face. Where are you today, if you don't mind sharing that? Or can you share it?
Well, what do you mean by where am I? I mean, I feel like I'm just sitting right here in my apartment and
All right, I'll give you an example. So decades ago, you started the path of self-inquiry. That's to lead you to awakening to the truth of who you are beyond the blinders that it's always been present. Most of us go through 90 years, if we live that long, with never seeing that. So comparatively speaking to where you were in the 70s and 80s and 90s, are you any closer to a satisfactory understanding of self today?
I think I have a good comprehension of, at least, well, I guess it's a belief system. I have a belief system, which is basically a Vedantic view of the world, you know, based on the Hindu idea, you know, I guess I still feel like I'm the same person I've always been.
When I learned about religions being based on a belief system, and you just mentioned Vedanta's portion of that that's based on a belief system, it's also based on a system of personal experience, and you've had that.
Right, yes.
So how much extra does that add to your feeling of, I guess, spiritual well-being? Because you can look both at your belief compounded in a positive way by your own experiences.
Well, I suppose it helps when you're suffering. You know? I think when you're happy, and when you're miserable, you're miserable. And no matter what you've done in the past, in those moments, that's where you are, you know. Do you know what I mean?
I think I know what you mean.
You know, in the earliest days, from 70 when I first saw Swami until, you know, into the maybe the 80s, all through the 70s, I was so in love with Swami, you know, like we used to think of ourselves like chickens with our heads cut off and we were still running around, you know. And so it was such an intoxicating kind of love, a spiritual love. It wasn't like a worldly love, because he was so radiant and so charming and so funny and so engaging beyond anything. And he could just wave his hand and materialize anything he wanted. And it was so natural. It just, you know, there were no flashing lights or sparks or anything like that. It just all just, it was our world, you know. It was just for the first couple of years. I was 23 years old when I met him, you know, and so this was the world I lived in. There was Sai Baba, and he waved his hand and materialized whatever he wanted to at any given time, anywhere, any place. Yeah. Plus blow on objects and change them and transform them completely into something else.
I'm aware of one. I don't remember if you actually saw it or not. Maybe this was what prompted me to ask about miracles, where he took a plant and miraculously changed it, transformed it into a stone, and then miraculously created a hole for it. So
yeah, I was right there. It was right. It was for Mr. Ratnlal, and Mr. Ratnlal and I were very good friends. And I would go to his bungalow behind Swami's house for tea in the afternoon, and we would talk about Ramana Maharshi. And then we would go. This was 1986 when I was doing the planetarium, so I was allowed on the driveway inside and everything. And we would talk about Ramana Maharshi and have tiffin, you know, and sometimes Mrs. Ratnlal would bring Swami's tiffin down because she brought him his food. And we would take it off of Swami's plate, you know, leftovers. And so we went out to the driveway to wait for Swami for evening darshan, where he would come out of, by then it was the Trey Vrindavan, the lotus-shaped house, and then he would walk down the driveway. The university people and guests and students would be sitting there. Then the gates would open and the rest of the public would be out under a big tree with a shed. And so we went early one day, and Swami came out of the bungalow, and he picked this little ice plant. Ice plants grow along the coast of California, along the cliffs. They look like little clusters of little green bananas. So he had growing in a potted plant by the door, and he picked one of the little green bananas between his thumb and first finger, And he came up to Mr. Ratnalal, and I was standing right next to him, and he said, "What is this, sir?" And Mr. Ratnalal said, "Swami," he said, "I don't know the botanical name." And Swami said, "No, this is God." And he went just like that, and just blew on it. Instantly, it became like a little black oval Shiva lingam. And he gave it to Mr. Ratnalal, but then as he was giving it to him, he went like this to Mr. Ratnalal, and he took his chain, and he said, "Oh," and he said, give it back, you know. So he took it and he held it this way, and the long way he blew a hole down the stone with his breath so he could wear it on the chain.
And you saw that.
Oh, yeah. I saw him take rings off of people, cheap little rings they bought in the bazaar made of copper, and say, "Now I'm going to make you a valuable diamond." And he would just go, and he would change it instantly to a beautiful gold and diamond or emerald, ruby. Then he would put it on the person's finger, but if it didn't fit right, he'd say, "Give it back," and he'd go, he'd blow on it again, and he'd say, "Now perfect fit," you know. Well, I've seen him materialize many different things, and like I said, wherever and whenever. In fact, and I wrote about it in Heart to Heart, a lot of the miracles that I saw. But I'm a big fan of the miracles. I mean, I've traveled, by Swami's grace, I've gotten to travel all over the world. I've been on every continent except Antarctica, and there's nobody else who can do that, really. But I mean, he was the only one on the planet who can literally actually materialize matter from nothing and transform it with his breath.
Yeah. But doing these recorded stories was my wife Jody's idea, and I asked her what was behind her motivation, and she said, "Well, only one, to leave for posterity the story of his followers for others to learn from, and no details too small." And that's why I probably I probably make people wonder, where am I coming from with so many questions? But I do believe these facts, these nuggets come out just like you shared with us there.
Certainly.
Yeah. So the last part of that question, I'm not sure you answered. Do you still have Baba dreams today?
Well, the last one I had, let's see, in 2014, I was diagnosed with CLL, which is chronic lymphocytic leukemia. And fortunately, it's a treatable leukemia, you know. And when I got the diagnosis, naturally, I was extremely upset. And shortly after that, Swami appeared in my dream. And it was in at Machu Picchu in Peru, where I had taken a yoga group on a tour some years before. And he came into this chamber and he sat down and he reached back and he squeezed my hand really tight, like he had done in 1971 in a group interview. And that made me feel like things were going to be okay. And then it's a slow growing kind of leukemia, CLL. And so I didn't, when it got to the point where I needed medication, I was very worried about how I would pay for it, because even with Medicare, cancer drugs can be extremely expensive. And the night before, I got a phone call which said I was going to get a grant to pay for the medication from this charity. Swami appeared in my dream and he said, "Think of Swamiji." And then the next day I got this call and saying that I was receiving this grant.
I did become familiar with that.
2017. That was 2017.
Yeah. Just a short while ago. Absolutely amazing. When I interviewed Jack Hawley, who had been 6 months there, 6 months in LA for 30 years, almost 30 years, and I interviewed him 19 years ago, I asked him if Baba had taken away much of his fear. He says, "Oh, it's all gone." And I went through a litany of what he might be fearful of today, you know, everything up to a nuclear holocaust, and absolutely nothing. So because he has that same trust that whether you still have it now or not, that materialized occasionally in his life as it materialized in 2017 in yours. Just a remarkable story.
In my dream, yeah.
Yeah, in your dream, right.
But it was significant, both dreams were, and every single time there's been some major, you know, very important thing to occur, Swami. It's been there in my dream. And interesting, the night before I got a phone call inviting me to speak in Australia, which was, I went to Australia 2017, I believe it was. And so, but I got the phone call maybe 6 months before inviting me to come and talk there. But the night before that, I think it was Prema Sai Baba came in my dream because I was with a group of people and someone I knew, and they said, Sai Baba's coming. And then when I looked, I saw this man, taller, with long hair, an Indian man. And I said, that's not Sai Baba. But then that person with the long hair came up to me and said, you, Howard Levin, come. And then I woke up, and then I went back to sleep, and I had the same exact dream where this same figure with the long dark hair said, you, Howard Levin, come. And then the next morning, I got a phone call, or the next day, asking me if I would come to Australia to speak at one of their regional, at their New South Wales retreat. So it might have been Prema Sai Baba, who knows?
I'm glad you shared that. I really am. Baba taught us not to become attached to his form. I always thought that was kind of surprising when I first heard it, because I went there thinking we were supposed to become attached to his form. Yeah. Have you succeeded in that? If Baba were here today in his human form, can you think of any questions that you might ask him that you're still curious about?
Well, my big question for God in general is, why even have the Kali Yuga?
Well, I mean,
why have it? It's not that good, I would just have a Satya Yuga all the time, with peace and love and harmony in the world forever and ever. I mean, these different yugas and this Kali Yuga with all the terrible things that go on. I mean, that's my big question. Why bother with it?
Well, let me ask you a question that you don't have to answer. I mean, it came from Baba's lips. It came from Ramana Maharshi's lips. All of this is a dream. It's a drama. It's a play in which you are on the end of a string, running around and carrying out the lines you were given to act. I mean, Does that bring you any solace, any comfort? That none of it's real, including the Kali Yuga?
Well, the thing is that when you're in individual human consciousness, here's what I believe. I don't know if it gives me solace or I don't know what it gives me. I don't like to define things so much, but the spark of individuality, the sense I am the body, and seeing the world as real and external, all arise simultaneously from God, directly from God. And so by turning everything inward, by inverting the whole thing, one can obtain self-realization.
Okay. You mentioned something that struck me in a pleasant way, in a pleasing way, that you referred to Baba as being childlike. Not all the time, but certainly sometimes. You even cited an example regarding his desire to have a planetarium. And I think you said it was either Dr. Goldstein or somebody presented him with the object of his desire, a planetarium. And his reaction was, too small, big planetarium I want. Just like maybe somebody under the Christmas tree getting a toy train when he wanted a bigger train.
Yeah, right, exactly, yeah. That's how he seemed, But he was basically making an excuse to me,
What was that for?
Because he had told me, I had said, he had asked me in 1978 what I really wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I just blurted out, I want to stay here and work for you. And he had said, get planetarium training. I'm building a planetarium. And I do all that. And I come back in 1979 and the planetarium is canceled and nobody seems to know what's going on. And so when he did finally call me in for an interview, it was like, he knew that he was getting a small planetarium. The small planetarium was just a miniature for the Whitefield College to sort of get the students stimulated and excited about the idea. This was all carefully planned out with Colonel Jogarao and Goldstein and Indulal Shaw and all these people, right? So Swami knew, but he's making an excuse to me and he's going, I wanted a big planetarium and I got a small planetarium. And he said, small boys look through little windows. What use is that? Because it was like a thing, it was like a big globe kind of thing, maybe that stood 12 feet tall and 10 feet tall. And it had these oval windows you could look in and see the solar system going around. They had ordered it from America and Swami said, it's all plastic. Everything in America is plastic. He was just making an excuse, here's the avatar making an excuse to me.
Yeah. I guess there were many faces of Baba, many shades of personality that came out to different people at different
He
times.
blamed it all on Goldstein and Bhagwantam, Dr. Bhagwantam.
Yeah.
He said it's their fault.
Did I read correctly that you had hepatitis at one time in India?
Yeah.
I knew you were sick from time to time. It just sort of comes with the territory of traveling the globe, especially to what used to be called third world countries, and now I think are euphemistically referred to as developing countries, which is good. Did Baba ever help you miraculously or in any other way recover from some of your illnesses?
Yes, actually. I had a really bad asthma
Mm-hmm.
In 1973. Or 74, maybe, I can't remember which year. And I told Swami on the Darshan line, Swami, I'm having a lot of asthma, right? And he said, not asthma, he said, eosinophilia. And then if you look at these commercials today for these pharmaceuticals on TV,
You hear that word
about eosinophilic asthma, it's very common. They have medicine, but he used that word. He said it's eosinophilia. And he told me to go to Bangalore and get good food. And then I remember he came to Bangalore at some point. I went earlier and was taken care of by the wonderful Harun Suleiman, who had the only place in the Regent's Guest House. He used to look after all the foreigners. He passed away now, but he looked after us like an uncle. He was just the best person. And I was staying out in Whitefield in Tadgodi village behind Swami's bungalow, and I was having asthma, and I was in a house renting a room, and I was sleeping in the gents side, and VJ and I think some other of the ladies were with the ladies. And in the middle of the night, I heard VJ wake up and yell out, "Swami's here." And then all of a sudden I felt my chest open up and expand, and all the asthma just went away.
That's pretty remarkable.
It is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, just hearing that he's here.
Yeah.
I remember reading that you often sang bhajans on call, on demand from Baba, and that one day your friend Bruce composed a brand new bhajan. I'm not sure how much time he spent on it, but it's certainly world renowned today and quite beautiful. Based
Bruce
on
Bradbury.
Pardon me?
Bruce Bradbury, he wrote "Love Is My Form."
Love is my form.
Some of Swami's words and putting it to music.
So everybody who calls himself or herself a devotee, very familiar with that beautiful bhajan. Did either one of you have any idea that not only would it live on, but become internationally renowned, and that Baba, in fact, would be recorded singing that many times himself?
Well, I don't think Bruce had any idea when he wrote it. I mean, we were living, that was when in 1970 in June, when we were in the house, and every evening we would sit around Swami and he would teach us bhajan. And he would ask us if we had any new songs.
So as we wrap this up, where would you describe to somebody who knows this much about your story as to where you are now? This is a little redundant, but I don't mind trying it a second time to find out what you're engaged with, where your thinking is, and where your heart is regarding your own spiritual path today.
Well, right now I feel like, being 74 years old, I don't have that much time left in this world. And the last thing that Sai Baba ever said to me, he was holding both my hands and he said, "Now, no more worldly thoughts and desires. You only think of Swamiji." And of course, when he told me that back in 1986, and I was only 40, I wasn't quite ready. But now I'm quite ready to, give up all worldly thoughts and desires and just focus on my self-inquiry.
Two last questions. Is there anything I've omitted? I tried to do my homework the best I could, but sometimes I come away from an interview and find out later that somebody says, "Boy, I wish you would have asked me this." I've given some thought to it, but never came up. Anything that you would like to add? I know this is putting you on the spot because you probably felt a barrage of questions coming at you from your past, from your present.
I think, if you look at the whole picture, look at Swami's birth, when he was born in 1926, do you know that Anantapur was actually, literally, according to the United Nations, the poorest district in India? And Puttaparthi was probably the poorest village. So if you look at that, Swami took birth in the poorest village in the poorest district. And how was he, in the height of the British Empire, right? If you contrast that with the King of England, whoever it was at the time in 1926, Edward, sitting in Buckingham Palace, which is somewhere near 1,000,000 square feet, and Baba in this teeny little 2-room, 3-room village hut, being born. And then he's short, he had dark skin, he had an afro, he wore a gown or a robe, right? And was completely the embodiment of everything you're supposed to be prejudiced against if you're a white British imperial colonizer, right? And from this position of probably absolute nothing, he rose up to have the biggest spiritual community in the world, a $9 billion trust, and a state funeral in India with all the prime minister and all the top dignitaries attending, being televised to the whole world. It's a pretty amazing,
Even more
story.
so when you understand that as a loyal son that he truly was, he obeyed his mother's following, who said, whatever you do, stay in your place of origin, your place of birth.
But that was part of his teaching. And look what he did. He brought prosperity, but mainly he brought health care. What are the big issues that face us today, not only in America, but in the whole world? Housing, healthcare, education, a clean environment, having clean drinking water and utilities. He fostered the arts, he fostered culture, he fostered sports. Swami always said, cooperation, not competition.
Mm-hmm.
He said competition was for sports, but for society, cooperation, And so I think his whole life, everything that he achieved, everything he did, is like a foundation, a blueprint for how humanity should spend its time and its resources. This is what we should be doing, and not waging war and not all the other terrible things that go on in the Kali Yuga.
I'm glad we commented on those points at the end to bring that out of you, because it always needs to be underscored, and I'm afraid it loses its ranking in people's consciousness from decade to decade. I'd be remiss, Howard, if I didn't ask the standard question that I pretty much have wrapped up all 450 Souljourns interviews with Baba devotees over the last 22 years.
That's a lot.
Asking you the same question, and I pretty much have an idea where you might go with it. Who is Sai Baba?
Pardon? Who is Sai Baba?
Yes. Last question.
I
Who is Sai Baba?
I think Sai Baba was a divine incarnation. An incarnation of divinity, just as Jesus was, and Buddha, and Muhammad, and Moses, and Krishna. I believe that the divine incarnates in many, many forms and many, many times.
And you're the only person I can recall asking this of. Would you care to expand a little bit on that answer?
Well, like I said, God is unknowable, but according to scripture, God is infinite, omnipresent, eternal, and God remains God, unchanging. And when the need arises, or when devotees pray, God will appear on the earth and set a path for mankind.
Howard, I want to thank you for donating more than an hour of your time, well over an hour. I'm sure you've answered these questions 1,000 times before. I appreciate the ability to share these with our audience. And I wish you many, many years of prosperity, emotional, spiritual, physical prosperity, and in any other way you choose, so that your story can continue to instill love, peace, and confidence in those who hear it. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, Ted. My pleasure.
Sai Ram, Sai Ram.
And thank you for joining us on Souljourns. Be sure to watch part 2 of Howard's story here on Souljourns. It's more of Howard's Sai Baba reflections recorded for posterity for the Hollywood, California Center by an old friend of Souljourns.
This is the book that Howard wrote.
Our
Good
friend
Chances.
Gene Massey in the summer of 2020.
When I read this book, I was in tears of wonderful stories.
That will be Howard
You can't
Levin,
imagine
part 2
the
on
stories
Souljourns.
that Howard
Sai Ram.